Someday the dream will end. Or will it? What's good, my fellow peasants? How you doing? So Final Fantasy X is a game I often hand out the top award to for having the deepest and most insightful plot of any Final Fantasy. I love it. It captured the hearts and minds in equally baffled measure. And in this two-parter, because I want to speculate with you guys over some of these out there concepts that the game portrays. Part 2 is going to be from a scientific theory, and in this part 1 here is going to be a more philosophical standpoint. So be sure to check them both out when they are out. So let's get into this juicy boy. He choked. 10 boldly presents a tale, whereas MC Tidus, he's living a regular life, or albeit, should I say, a sports superstar kind of lifestyle. You know, forming harems, showboating to adoring fans, and encouraging young kids who one day want to become blitzballs. Ironically, many of us would dream of experiencing this sort of life of notoriety and fame, before suddenly Tidus is plucked into the sky and dropped into a world where everything seems just as solid and real as any shore, except now he is the product of a dream. Or more accurately, he has been for thousands of years, you know, after Yu Yevons turned his Anakin citizens into the faith to recreate an entire dream version of his city that's about to be destroyed because of the evil tech, and thusly creates himself an armor fashioned for millions of powerflies, condensed by gravity magic, which is called sin, and in turn reacts to its latest Aeon inhabitant once called Jack, MC's dad, and creates the temporal ruins Anakin of bollocks to him. I ain't explaining it. I'm sure most of you get the general drift of 10's story. But the deeper question in all of this wackiness is the one that I'd rather tackle, is just how fantasy is this Final Fantasy? How out there, how beyond the realms of reality is it? How much of this seemingly wacky and what some would say convoluted story, how much can really translate into our reality? Reality. Ooh, that is a loaded word. No, definition describes it as the state of things as they are, rather than as they are imagined to be. Yeah, it sounds straightforward, but what really is the difference between real and imaginary? Now, while scientists have certainly verified a difference, actually finding that neurological processes, they move in reverse between these two states, between when we're imagining and when we're really experiencing, complete reverse in our minds. And we'll cover more of that in part 2. But this process, it wasn't so cut and dry when it came to dreaming. The sheer realness and lucidity that some dreamers report that they can and do experience could arguably be seen as so convincing, almost as convincing as Tidus's dreams Anakin reality. Now, lucid dreaming is where individuals, they can move around in their dreams, they can talk, sing, dance, even experience emotions as strongly as love and hate, all seemingly at their own will and with profound clarity. Science has even really struggled to explain why physical pain can be experienced in some people's dreams. Simulated studies show that while this pain that people can experience in dreams is never as acute as, say, putting your foot in a damn fire would actually feel like, but it doesn't take away that pain is still felt. And the problem with acuteness is it's just another reference point that is contingent on your perceived real-world experiences so far. How much pain we each would experience from putting our foot in the fire, let's say, would be completely different. So the dream state is, again, just basing its reality from another reference point that we're still not sure is that real. And philosopher Bertrand Russell once described how thrown he is, and many philosophers have been, by the ideas of dreams. He described his own false awakenings. Now, false awakenings, I'm sure some of you have had them. These are states where some individuals believe fully they have woken up. You know, they get out of bed, they brush their teeth, they eat breakfast, they do other morning rituals that seem so real just to find themselves wake up again in bed. And in fact, Bertrand Russell described experiencing just such a false awakening almost 100 times in succession when he was coming around from a general anesthetic. And this led him to later say, "I do not believe that I am now dreaming, but I cannot prove that I am not." And this is just one example of the many great thinkers over the course of human history who have speculated over the oddly similar qualities that exist between dreams and reality, from the allegory of Plato's caves, or Aristotle's prophesying on dreams, or René's dream argument. They all pull into question reliability of the senses, of how certain we can really be that real is in fact real. Because what they often all acknowledge is times when their waking real-world senses were so utterly duped and tricked. And the science of perception psychology goes a long way in backing this, that there is a rather alarming variation in how differently we can all perceive the world, and the types of glitches we can experience in that. And now that's from colours to belief systems, cultural narratives we are born into, as well as the events and emotions and thought patterns that we each put our focus into. Our inner worlds are all so very different. So the dream concept that is presented in FF10 can be drawn into the real world, where we question just how much of our experience is akin to, say, Tidus's experience in Spira. Do we really have as much control over our reality as we think, or are we dragged along by predetermined conditions? Often like how regular dreams play out for us, they just sort of happen to us. It often seems seldom under our influence, very random, out of our control. And a study in 1980 and 2010, they took 150 adults, monitored in a, of course, non-invasive way, their dreams. We don't have a way to actually see dreams yet, but what they found is that in 2010, dreams of people being on a plane occurred 10% more frequently. Now the conclusion was, and it seems quite obvious, was that more plane trips had been undertaken now than in the 1980s. So past experience was absolutely playing a role in the kinds of dreams these people were having. But now we translate into that real world, and our waking reality is not far different. It is also built up over just such layers of experience of things that have come before. And some philosophers have argued this makes reality very analogous to a dream, one where we are pulled along like the currents of a river we can't swim against. This is where deeper questions of, say, free will or determinism come into play. Did you really choose the life you're living right now, the partner, the job, or the passions that you have? Were they predetermined? Now, if we go to FF10, let's say, it would seem at first glance that the team definitely did have free will. In fact, it would seem that that's what won the day. They chose from their own free will to oppose the Yevon church. They chose to oppose Yuna having to sacrifice herself to summon the final Aeon, or defying Yuna Leska's will. But was that really their choice? Did they have free will in that? Because let's look again. Go to Tidus. You could argue all of his choices were preordained and out of his choice. He was brought into this existence by the faith after all. And why? Surely because of the choices they must have known he would make. No, they must have known that he would oppose the sacrifice of Yuna. Because he was a newcomer to this world, he wasn't accustomed to the traditions, he was not desensitized to sin and the cycle of summoners sacrificing themselves. They must have even known he would fight sin, because his father Jecht was in there. After all, let's question, could Tidus have really killed Jecht had they not had such a dysfunctional relationship in the past? Maybe if Jecht was Father of the Year, he couldn't have done it. Or one might even say it was love that pushed Tidus to be able to do it. Now, did Tidus do it because he had fallen in love with Yuna and he was going to go to any extent for that? But even that notion is questionable. Did Tidus even choose to fall in love with Yuna, or was it because she had a similar nurturing nature like his mother? Taking it further to, let's say, 10-2, was it because Tidus was fashioned by the faith around the concept of Shuyin and that Len bore such a resemblance to Yuna? How many layers of conscious or subconscious choices were really being made here? How much was Tidus' own choosing? And that can be quite an unpleasant thought. After all, we all like to think that qualities such as compassion and love, they are things that stem from inside us and us alone, that these are expressions of who we are. But it was Nietzsche who said, there are no beautiful surfaces without a terrible depth. I mean, surely the faith would not have constructed these elaborate unions and meetings and circumstances had they not known in advance the kind of decisions Tidus was going to make. So Do these kind of forces exist in reality? Do we have a purpose? Do we have a destiny? Is there any kind of higher will, or are we, again, just slaves to the structure of our own minds? Has any decision you have ever made, really think about it, has it not been dictated in some way by some previous occurrence? Is every decision fresh and organic? Many philosophers would argue not, and if not, then what is the difference between this life you are living and a dream? If it's all just a string of mental processes following one after the other from an earlier point that you ultimately had no control over, well, when you think of it like that, the way your life is playing out is really no difference to how your dreams can play out. And it's not just philosophers who have reached this somewhat terrifying conclusion. Ancient cultures and religions, they have too, and I find them deeply fascinating, whether that's from Hinduism, who had a goddess called Parvati. She was the goddess of dreams as well as birth and creation, which suggests that the Hindu tradition gives to the dream world and the dream mindset a creative ability and power to produce something that did not previously exist in the material world. And that is so similar to Yu Yevons' ability, is it not? To manifest dreams anaconed into spirit. That's how essentially the faith work. Dreams giving rise to things that didn't previously exist. But then also Buddhism, Toltec wisdom, Egyptian culture, Babylonian, Greek, these and many more. They've often alluded to dreams being either a state we are actively living in right now, or ones that are indeed guiding our life choices and purpose. This would be closer to Tidus, as actually being a dream is what he is. And in most any cultural era you look, the question of how illusory the world we either create or are subject to, it has permeated the minds of many deep thinkers. And that when it comes to our consciousness, there are far less absolutes than a lot of us are willing to accept. Doesn't even require going to some of those further out there concepts like, are we living in a simulation about to be offered existential crisis roofies at any moment by a badass looking dude in shades? Because, putting all that sort of crazy thinking aside for a sec, even though we might be in a simulation, the mind and the senses alone, they're already bizarre enough, strong enough, and at the same time frail enough to produce any number of conclusions about how real is. So what are we? Are we Tidus? Are we Yevon? Creators or creations? Are we the dreamer or the dream? Some have argued that the answer to this hinges on the level of consciousness that the individual operates at. So whether your life is swayed, for example, by internal or external values, do you blame the world for all that has gone awry in it, or do you seek to turn failure into opportunities? Do you own it? In the words of my favourite character of all time, Dennis Reynolds, do you get got, or do you go get? And maybe that's all there is. Maybe that vague, ambiguous font of internal power is all we really have to steer the outcome of this dream, of this reality, whichever one it really is. And my intention in this video, bar the enjoyment I get from, I just love it, correlating fantasy games and real life. But my intention, it wasn't just to plunge you into an existential crisis, because what I would like to finish this video on is my personal outlook. So this is just what I found most inspiring when it comes to this topic. And this comes from Alan Watts. And it's really helped me reconcile that if this is all an illusion, a dream state, or free will doesn't exist, this is what put the beauty rather than the existential pain into it. So imagine that you have the power to experience anything you wanted in life. Just imagine that for a second. Like, you can literally have anything. You have as much unlimited freedom to have any experience as you do, say, in a dream. So you are essentially dreaming your reality. Now, what would you dream? Big question. Well, most of us, I'm sure, would start as, say, superstars. That we'd be rich, we'd be famous, we'd be loved, respected, adored, we'd have a big house, extravagant parties. And it just would be all out pleasure, 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 I'm sure. But eventually, after you've done all the variations of pleasure, and you've done that to an exhaustive number of times, you'd then try to make it more interesting, wouldn't you? Maybe this time you'd start going on adventures. You'd save a princess, slay dragons, defeat arch enemies, and maybe at one point you'd want something more profound. Maybe you'd want to experience a tragic yet deeply beautiful love story. Maybe you'd want the plot of your dreams to start involving things like betrayal and great falls that turn into arcs of great heroic rises and triumphs. Bittersweet sadnesses that lead to soul illuminating joys. Gradually you'd be introducing more and more hardships, trials, tribulations to put more experience and weight into your dream worlds. Perhaps you'd even dream that you weren't dreaming, so that the experience you had was far more immersive, and on it would go, dream after dream, until eventually you'd be dreaming the life you are living right now. And I love that thought. In a reality or non-reality of infinite dream states, eventually you'd land right in the life you were living right now. And this helped me see that just as a dream, my life is never more than a change in thinking away from being something beautiful. That there is a purpose for it being exactly what it is right now. And what FF10 taught me, this beautiful legendary game, is that if by some chance we are a dream, then leaving words unsaid and true feelings unexpressed will ultimately be our deepest regrets, if, when, and where we happen to awake. So embrace your dream-like existence and find those words, because we don't know when it will end. All we really know is that it will. Someday.